Chapter 4 Baptism on Malachor. The shuttle descended through an atmosphere of smoke and silence. Malachor hung in space like a wound, its surface cracked by tectonic scars, its color not gray, but black, deep and lightless. No vegetation clung to its crust, no rivers ran, no lights welcomed travelers. It was a dead world, scorched by the past, untouched by time, and steeped in memory. From orbit, Kyel saw the jagged remains of shattered citadels, entire mountains carved into runes, vast plains where ancient engines of war lay buried like corpses. There were no cities, only tombs. The ship rattled as it broke through the upper atmosphere. Lightning arced through the ash-heavy clouds. The sky bled violet and ember, a swirling canvas of toxic beauty. Kyel leaned forward, staring through the viewport, silent. Malvex sat beside him, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the horizon. He said nothing. He didn't have to. The force had already begun to hum around them. A dirge, a warning, a welcome. The landing platform jutted from the cliffside like the tongue of a beast's mouth. Stone layered with obsidian, etched with faded Sith glyphs that still shimmered when touched. The moment Kyel stepped from the shuttle, the air hit him like a weight. Hot, dry, thick with soot. The winds didn't howl. They screamed. Every gust seemed to carry the echo of 1,000 voices, crying out, chanting, whispering secrets to the dirt. Kyel squinted into the dust storm and followed Malvex toward a towering structure in the distance. The dead spire. It was unlike anything he had seen, an impossibly tall, jagged ziggurat rising from the earth like a broken tooth. Its exterior was composed of layered black stone, carved with vertical ridges, as though formed from the bones of the world itself. At its peak, lightning struck constantly, drawn by a hidden magnetism. As they approached, Kyel stepped over bones, some humanoid, others unrecognizable. They weren't arranged. They hadn't been moved. No one cared enough. This was not a place of ceremony. It was a graveyard. And yet, it felt alive. The force pulsed through the ground here, deeper and older than anything Kyel had known. Not a living presence, but a pressure, like standing in the lungs of something asleep and waiting to wake. He turned his head slightly, and for a heartbeat, he saw shapes in the ash. Not people, not creatures. Imprints. Movements replaying from the past, duels fought long ago, screams lost to time, cloaked figures kneeling before altars now shattered. All of it flickering in and out like dying stars. "Are they ghosts?" Kyel whispered, barely audible over the wind. "No," Malvex answered without turning. "They're echoes. The Force remembers everything that dies here." Kyel felt it then, not fear, but awe. He had walked through fire, blood, betrayal. But this was something sacred. Inside the dead spire, the world grew cold. The interior was pitch black. As they entered, red torches along the walls burst into flame on their own, triggered by their presence. The main corridor stretched on for hundreds of meters, lined with statues of faceless figures, their hands outstretched as if in warning or welcome. Kyel noticed that some statues had been broken, heads cleaved, hands removed. "Sith who forgot themselves," Malvex said, noticing his glance. "This place remembers them differently." They passed through several chambers, each one colder, quieter. One was filled with nothing but broken kyber crystals, laid in concentric circles around a stone plinth. Another was a vast hall with an obsidian floor, so polished it reflected stars from a sky that could no longer be seen. Finally, they reached the sanctum, a chamber carved in perfect symmetry, with a raised platform in the center and 7 deep alcoves along the walls. Kyel stood at the edge of the platform. "This is where your training begins," Malvex said, his voice echoing through the vault. "There are no Jedi here, no Jedi codes, no promises of peace." He circled Kyel slowly. "Only pain, clarity, and the truth buried beneath everything you've been taught to fear." Kyel knelt, not out of reverence, out of understanding. He felt the force pressing down on him now, so heavy it stole the breath from his lungs, not crushing, forging. Malvex stopped behind him. "There is no peace, only passion," Kyel answered. Malvex's voice sharpened. "There is no fear, only power. There is no death." Kyel opened his eyes. "Only the Force." Malvex stepped forward and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. The air crackled with unseen energy. "Welcome to Malachor," he said. "Welcome to what you were always meant to become." And in the heart of a tomb world, under a sky that never forgave, Kyel Aven began his new life. Not as a prisoner, not as a weapon, but as a shadow given shape. Training began before dawn. Not that dawn meant anything on Malachor, a world where the sky was always smothered in ash and lightning. But within the Dead Spire, time moved by Malvex's will alone. When he woke Kyel, it was with no ceremony, no warning, just a whisper carried through the Force. "Upper." Kyel opened his eyes. There was no bed, only a cold slab of stone and a folded tunic. His muscles ached. His hands were blistered from the climb the day before. But he stood immediately. Malvex waited in the sanctum. He did not speak. He threw Kyel a training stave and stepped onto the dueling platform, drawing a stave of his own, long, black, wrapped in worn hide. Kyel caught the weapon, barely ready. Malvex moved. The blow came fast, too fast. It cracked against Kyel's ribs, sending him sprawling across the stone. Pain radiated through his side. He tried to rise. Another strike to the leg. He dropped again. "Lesson 1, Malvex said, voice cold. "Pain is not the enemy. It is the teacher." Kyel grit his teeth and pushed himself up. "No form, no balance. You fight like a survivor, not a warrior." Another blow. And survival means nothing when facing a superior will. Kyel tried to parry. He failed. Malvex did not relent. The duel went on for hours. When it ended, Kyel was on the floor, blood dripping from his lip, one eye swelling shut. "Return at dusk," Malvex said. Kyel did. The days that followed were a blur of agony and awakening. Malvex trained him in silence and shadow. There were no holocrons, no sparring droids, no lessons spoken aloud. Everything was physical, everything was brutal, and everything demanded Kyel's full attention. He learned to move not through instruction, but through observation. He learned the shape of the dark side, not as fire or fury, but as will, the ability to assert oneself upon reality, to bend the world through purpose. He meditated while suspended from the ceiling by chains. He balanced over bottomless chasms while force storms cracked overhead. He was buried up to his neck in volcanic ash for 2 days and forced to still his heart until even the tomb beasts slithered past without noticing him. At night, he bled from the nose and mouth, his hands split open from training. But he never asked for rest, and Malvex never offered it. On the 7th day, Kyel collapsed mid-exercise. He awoke in the Vault of Iron, one of the inner sanctums, filled with shattered armor and ancient weapons. Malvex sat in the center, meditating, the relic shard he had recovered from Vuren floating before him. Kyel struggled to sit. Malvex did not open his eyes. "You are not failing." Kyel blinked. "It feels like failure." It is growth. Malvex opened his eyes. They glowed faintly in the low light. You are not here to win, Kyel. You are here to break, to shed the skin of the weak. I don't want to be broken, Kyel said softly. Malvex stood and approached him. You already are. I'm here to show you how to use the pieces. He raised a hand and the relic shard floated toward Kyel. It pulsed red. Pain radiated from it, not physical, but spiritual, like the pressure of 1,000 dying memories. Kyel reached out. His hand trembled, but he took it. And in that moment, the force flared through him, searing and sharp. Visions burned across his mind. Wars long dead, planets torn in half, Sith locked in ritual, Jedi falling from grace, and one voice, ancient and infinite, whispering, "Power is not given, it is remembered. Take what was always yours." When Kyel opened his eyes, his skin steamed with heat. The shard hovered beside him, glowing brighter. Malvex nodded once. "The Forge of Will has accepted you." Kyel looked down at his hands. He no longer saw scars, only purpose. That night he began construction of his first lightsaber, not from a crystal, but from ruin. Scrap metal, shattered glass. The broken hilt of a Sith blade burned long ago. He worked in silence, letting the Force guide his instincts, letting the pain of each day focus his thoughts. When he finished, the blade sparked and died. He tried again, and again. Each time it failed. But each time his hands grew steadier, his vision clearer, his will stronger. By the 14th day, Malvex called him to the platform again. Kyel arrived not as a child, but as something forming, something inevitable. He had not yet won, but he had stopped losing, and the Force no longer whispered to him. It waited. The forge room was a sanctum of echoes. Carved from the heart of the dead spire, it was a space designed not for ceremony, but for crucible. Heat hissed from subterranean vents, casting molten light across the walls. The workbenches were carved from obsidian and scarred with centuries of failed attempts, burn marks, claw scratches, dried blood. Some bore the names of apprentices who had succeeded. Most were unmarked. In the center of the room sat Kyel. His hands trembled. Before him lay the components he had scavenged, a fractured emitter assembly from a forgotten saber, bits of cortosis plating, a sliver of wiring torn from an ancient droid's innards, and, at the center, a rare, unstable Kyber shard, one he had not bled through rage, but forced into harmony through sheer will. It pulsed faintly in the dark. This was not a Jedi's rite. There was no chanting, no robes, no guidance, only fire and failure. Kyel worked in silence for hours. He shaped the hilt with a precision he didn't know he possessed. He bent the metal with the Force, etched the glyphs with a scavenged vibroblade, wrapped the grip in his own torn tunic. Every breath was measured, every movement a trial. The Force guided his hands, not gently, but like a storm guiding a tree's fall. Violent, demanding, final. When it was finished, it looked imperfect, patchwork, raw, but it felt right. He took a breath and ignited it. The blade sprang to life, and Kyel froze. It was red, not vibrant, not wild, just red, uniform and silent, humming with barely contained tension. A Sith's blade, simple and cruel, born of will and necessity. It hissed through the air with a sharp edge, humming like a scream suppressed beneath metal. For a breathless moment, Kyel stared. Then the blade sparked, sputtered, and shattered. A violent crack. Sparks exploded from the hilt. The emitter ruptured in his hand, searing his palm. The blade guttered out with a screech, like metal screaming. Kyel dropped it and fell to his knees, clutching his hand. The air filled with the scent of burnt flesh. Silence followed. Then, footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Malvex entered the forge room, expression unreadable beneath his hood. Kyel looked up, still kneeling, breathing hard through gritted teeth. I failed. Malvex did not respond. He raised a hand, and Kyle's body lifted from the floor, slammed into the wall hard enough to crack the stone. Pain shot through his back, but he didn't cry out. He slid to the floor. You failed well, Malvex said at last. Kyel blinked through the haze. Then why? Because pain is the only truth that endures, Malvex snapped. You think the blade is power? That crystal, that metal, that grip, those are tools, nothing more. He stepped forward and picked up the ruined hilt. He tossed it at Kyle's feet. This is not a weapon, it's a mirror, and it broke because you are still fractured. Kyel looked at the shattered remains. I did everything right. No, Malvex said. You did everything carefully. He crouched beside him. You want to forge a blade that endures? Then you must first learn to survive your own breaking. He stood. Rebuild it, or die trying. The next day, Kyel returned to the forge. His hand blistered, his ribs bruised, his vision blurred with exhaustion. But he came, and the day after that, and the day after. Each failure taught him something. About balance, about structure, about himself. He no longer tried to copy ancient designs. He stopped mimicking rituals. He listened, not to the Force's words, but its silences. What the crystal didn't want. What he needed to give it. On the 8th attempt, he didn't flinch when the blade ignited. And this time, it held. A multicolored blade leapt from the hilt, starting in deep cobalt blue at the base, clear and calm before bleeding into vibrant red at the tip, as if fury itself had been tempered by focus. The gradient shimmered subtly with every movement, a living flame of paradox. The sound was lower than most sabers. A hum like a growl kept on a leash. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply knelt and held it in both hands. And this time, it did not break. Malvex returned that night, stood in the forge doorway, and said nothing. He looked at the blade, then at the boy, and nodded once. You are no longer forging a weapon, he said. You are becoming one. Kyel said nothing. The blade remained lit. And for the first time since Malachor welcomed him, it cast a light that did not flicker. There were no announcements, no warning, no ritual cloaks or sermons. Malvex simply entered Kyle's meditation cell at dusk, a length of black cloth in one hand and a curved dagger in the other. It's time, he said. For what? Ritual. Kyel stood without hesitation. He did not ask what kind. Trial 1. The Earth. They brought him to the spire's lowest catacomb, a sunless chamber beneath the base of Malachor itself, deeper than the forge, beyond the vaulted crypts, far below even the relic vaults. The walls were carved with skulls, not ornamentation, real remains. The bones of Sith apprentices, failed acolytes, and fallen warlords long forgotten. There was no ceremony. Malvex blindfolded Kyel with the black cloth, then, wordlessly, pressed his palm to a sigil on the floor. The stone beneath Kyel gave way. He dropped. He landed hard in a pit of dry ash and crumbling soil. Before he could cry out, the opening above sealed shut with a thunderous boom. Total darkness. The air became still and suffocating. The soil began to shift, sliding into the hole, filling it, burying him by the fistful. He clawed upward, panicked, but the more he moved, the faster the earth seemed to swallow him. Soon it pressed against his chest, his neck, his face. His lungs burned. Then he was still, buried, completely. There was no air, no movement, only the weight of the world on his body and the crush of silence in his ears. Then came the voices. Not audible, inside, his mother's voice, faint but accusatory. "You could have saved us." His sister's voice, firm, hurt. "You let me die in the dirt. Now you lie there too." His brother's voice, broken, afraid. "You stopped looking. You let them take me." Kyel screamed into the soil, but his mouth filled with grit. His arms twitched, then spasmed. He felt the heat behind his eyes and the pounding of his heart. It began to fade. The panic turned to despair, the despair to numbness. But somewhere beneath it all, he remembered Malvex's only instruction. Breathe. He slowed his heart. He focused on the spaces between the pain. He found the thread of the force, not as rescue but as reminder. He let the earth hold him like a cocoon. When the stone ceiling above finally opened, hours or days later, Kyel was not gasping. He rose slowly, soil shedding from his frame like burned skin. He said nothing. Malvex said only, "Next." Trial 2, the mirror. The second trial took place in the Chamber of Reflections, a room known only to the deepest initiates. It was octagonal, its floor perfectly symmetrical, its ceiling endlessly high. The walls were made of obsidian mirrors, polished until they caught not only the body's image, but the soul's. Kyel stepped inside alone. The door sealed shut behind him. Light ignited from beneath his feet, crimson and cold. And the mirrors came to life. Out stepped his family, his mother, her eyes kind and tired. His sister, standing tall, a glowing blade in her hand. His brother, a little older now, gaunt and silent. They didn't speak. They accused. Not with words, but with presence, with every expression, every look of disappointment. Their eyes were wet with the weight of abandonment. Then they ignited sabers. Kyel hesitated. "No," he whispered. "You're not real." But pain does not care about truth. His mother moved first, fluid, graceful, striking low. Kyel deflected. Barely. Then came his sister, fast and furious, her footwork unnervingly familiar. His brother was last, striking from behind like a shadow, unpredictable and wild. They fought as one. Every strike landed with the weight of memory. Every parry scraped against his composure. "Why didn't you save us?" his sister whispered between blows. He said nothing. "You could have come for me," his brother snarled. Kyel stepped back. "You abandoned all of us," his mother cried. He fell to one knee. The sabers came down. He raised his hand. Not in fear, but in choice. The force exploded outward, a wave of will. Not rage, not sorrow, but clarity shattered the illusions. The reflections cracked. The room went dark. Kyel stood at the center, alone again, sweating, shaking, alive. Trial 3. The silence. The final trial was worse, because it gave him nothing to fight. No blade, no pain, no noise, just absence. He was led to a chamber with no features, no lights, no vents, no voices. A stone dais sat at the center, his only companion. The door closed behind him and did not reopen. He waited. 1 day passed, then 2, then 4. His stomach growled, then rebelled, then stopped. His mouth dried, his throat cracked. He grew lightheaded. The force, ever present, now felt distant, watching, testing. Visions returned, temptations, dreams of food, of soft beds, of freedom. They offered him water, warmth, peace. He refused them. He meditated until the pain turned to silence, until the silence turned to stillness. He reached the void beyond thought, and there he found something new, a pulse, steady, powerful, his core, his essence, not built by rage, not fed by sorrow, but defined by choice. He had chosen this, again and again, from Lord to Vuren to Malachor, and he would continue choosing, even if it killed him. When the doors opened at last, Malvex entered. Kyel sat cross-legged, eyes open, hollow but unbroken. "You endured," Malvex said. "I adapted. You survived. I chose to survive." Malvex studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You are ready." Kyel stood. The force moved differently around him now, not as a whisper, but as a shadow that followed his steps. Silent, constant. The trials had not made him stronger. They had revealed that he already was. Kyel no longer feared the dark. By now, the dark was a companion, a tutor, a mirror. On Malachor there was no peace, only the silence between storms and the lessons carved into bone and ash. But through the crucible of the ritual trials, something inside Kyel had shifted. He no longer reached for survival. He reached for control. And Malvex, watching with that predator's patience, knew the time had come. Telekinesis. Their first lesson began at the edge of the spire's broken Colosseum. Once a dueling arena for long-dead Sith, it was now cracked and partially collapsed. A circular arena, open to the gray sky, where time and war had left jagged stone slabs piled like a graveyard of monoliths. Malvex stood in the center. Kyel stood across from him. No lightsabers, no motion. Only a single stone, massive, flat, twice Kyel's height, hovering above the pit's center, balanced on a splinter of the Force. "Hold it," Malvex commanded. Kyel extended his hand. The weight of the boulder pressed instantly into his mind, not physically, but in sensation. It wasn't the strain of muscles, it was the weight of presence, like trying to stop a mountain from remembering how to fall. He gritted his teeth and dug into that place inside him. Not rage, not fear, but will. Cold and sharp like a blade drawn silently in the dark. The stone wavered, held. Malvex narrowed his eyes. "Split it." Kyel blinked sweat from his eyes. He clenched his fingers. His mind focused not on force, but on intention. A wedge, a single direction, precision. The stone cracked down the center. Not shattered, not blasted apart. Split, clean, surgically, with a tremor in the force like the strike of a hammer. The halves dropped, thudding into the dust. Malvex stepped over them and nodded once. "You don't move matter," he said. "You convince it to obey." Combat precognition. The next test was without warning. Kyel entered the spire's corridor one evening, exhausted from meditation, and the floor beneath his feet collapsed. He fell into a chamber of flickering torches and scorched stone. The lights went out. And then came the blades. Not real sabers, training beams, sharp enough to burn but not kill. Dozens. Fired from droid limbs that emerged from the walls at random angles, left, right, above, behind. Kyel spun, ducked, twisted. Then he began to predict, not by watching, by feeling. Every attack sent a ripple through the force, subtle, like wind pressure before a storm. The moment he stopped trying to see them, and instead let the future brush against his skin, he moved like water through fire. He wasn't perfect. He took hits, but fewer with each sequence. By the end of the hour, he was standing in the center of the chamber, sabers clashing around him, eyes closed, body still. Nothing touched him. Controlled empathy. This was the most dangerous lesson, because it had nothing to do with reflexes, and everything to do with memory. Malvex led him to a chamber of mirrors, not illusions, but empathic amplifiers carved from volcanic crystal. In the center sat a single captive, a former Republic informant, left over from one of Malvex's early raids. Bound, muzzled, broken. "Read him," Malvex said. Kyel hesitated. He had felt emotions all his life: fear, anger, pain, but only as shadows, whispers in a crowd. Now he reached out with intention. The man's fear hit him like a wave. Kyel staggered backward. It wasn't fear of death. It was guilt. The man had sold out a village on Nirida too. He'd watched children burn for credits. Kyel felt the memory, not in images, but in sensation. The crackle of flame, the shaking of his hand as he signed the deal. The moment he lied to the last mother standing, it made Kyel sick. He clenched his fists, tempted to end it there, to extinguish the fear. But Malvex stopped him with a hand. "Number, control it." Kyel closed his eyes. He didn't cut off the emotion. He channeled it, took the guilt, the regret, and wrapped it around the man's fear like string around a blade. Not to punish him, not to destroy him, to use him. When Kyel opened his eyes, the prisoner was silent, staring at Kyel as if seeing something not human. Kyel simply turned to Malvex and said, "I understand." Malvex smiled. Days passed, then weeks. Kyel practiced his empathy in sparring matches, redirecting opponents with glimpses of their own terror. He stopped fights before they began by manipulating fear. He turned strikes aside with a twitch of the hand. He began walking the corridors with a stillness that even the acolyte sentries noticed. He didn't radiate power. He carried it like a concealed blade, not yet a master, but no longer a student. Malachor never changed. Its sky remained ash-gray and wounded, its winds forever thick with whispers of the long dead. The spire stood unmoved, towering and watchful. But inside its vaults, behind blackened doors sealed for centuries, something had begun to shift, not in the stone, but in the boy who had once been a prisoner of slavers. Kyel was no longer that boy, but he wasn't yet the Sith Malvex had expected either. He spent hours in the library, not the archives Malvex deemed essential. Those were filled with war doctrines, force rituals, and manuals on alchemical cruelty. No, Kyel lingered in the sealed chambers beneath them, where ancient tomes slept in stasis fields, their contents neither holy Sith nor Jedi. Manuscripts bound in reptile hide, datacrons encoded in dialects so obscure they hadn't been spoken aloud in 1,000 years. He read the Jedi Code, not to mock it, but to understand what it had once meant. He studied the writings of Jedi exiles who'd walked away from their order, not out of weakness, but out of conviction. He dissected the philosophies of Sith lords who had crumbled, not from failure, but from questioning the price of their power. He found no easy answers, but he wasn't seeking them. What he wanted was meaning, not purpose handed down, but truth forged through contradiction. Malvex noticed the change. At first, he said nothing. He watched from afar, hidden behind corridors or vault doors, cloaking his presence in the Force to observe the boy's habits. Kyel meditated longer now, not with burning intensity, but with unsettling calm. His blade practice had become more fluid, less driven by domination and more by efficiency. In combat simulations, he won with fewer strikes. He spared when he didn't need to. He killed only when it served the lesson. He did not ask for praise. He did not seek affection. But something else had taken root in his gaze, a curiosity that Malvex had not planted and could not kill. One evening, Malvex summoned Kyel to the inner chamber of trials, not for a challenge, but for conversation. The boy arrived silent, unarmed, robes singed from recent sparring. Malvex stood before a tall hollow statue of Darth Veritas, a Sith scholar infamous for refusing to teach unless the student asked the right question. "You've been reading," Malvex said without turning. "Yes." "Jedi texts, among others. You're aware that attachment to false ideals is what destroys men." "I'm not attached," Kyel said simply. "I'm learning." Silence. Then Malvex turned. "You question too much. I was trained to survive, not to obey." For a moment, Malvex said nothing. His expression was unreadable. Then he approached Kyel, slowly, each step measured. "You are stronger than I expected." Kyel looked up. "I was expected to be a weapon?" "You are a weapon." "And you don't name your weapons." That stopped Malvex short. The question wasn't sharp. It wasn't defiant. It was human. "I name what serves me," Malvex said at last. Kyel didn't react. But in the quiet that followed, Malvex felt the echo of his own fear, not of failure, but of attachment. He had not meant to care, but he did, and he hated that he did. That night, Malvex watched Kyel train alone in the echo chamber. The boy moved with balance now, not hesitation, not rage. He leapt, twisted, deflected blaster bolts with ease, shaped the force into spears of kinetic energy without overexertion. But it was not the power that caught Malvex's attention. It was the choice. Kyel chose when to be brutal and when to be still. He had stopped needing to be shaped. He was becoming his own blade,